Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Kane, and I'm here with my partner,
Ann Rothenberger Day.
I don't like to speak for you.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the beginning of the funding year 2019 E-rate season. Nothing like a good E-rate season to get right in the middle of, I don't know, how about Christmas? Yeah, that's great. What a great way to spend Christmas. Let's do E-rate. Anyway, thank you for joining us. Today we're going to do a session today on filing the Form 470. We will take a look at we'll take a look at competitive bidding and the processes associated with that. We'll look at the Form 470 itself, and we'll do a bit of a demonstration with that. We'll have a discussion of some RFP and RFP documents, along with the discussion of some of the pieces and parts that are associated with that process and the 28-day waiting period. We'll also be looking at selecting service providers, how you go through the process of evaluating the bids that you've received. And we'll also be looking at some miscellaneous kinds of things, some things to consider. And we'll wrap up with a demonstration of the discount data, which we just received from our data team. Ann and I are hard at work in getting that data prepped and into the spreadsheets that we distribute to you each year. So those will be coming very, very shortly. I'm hoping that perhaps as long as we don't have a slew of meetings that sometimes can crop up, that we might be able to hopefully get that out to you within the next week or so. I will put the caveat of "or so" on there just because we don't know exactly how long it will take us, but based on previous experience, probably about a week to a week and a half. Anyway, let's get right into it. Megan, if you could pull up the PowerPoint, that'd be great. Thank you very much. And we are looking at, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know how to make that go away. Escape. There you go. Thanks. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at a competitive bidding overview.
Is this dead?
Mm-hmm.
That mouse.
There we go. We'll just do it that way. Old-fashioned way. As I said, we'll be looking at a competitive bidding overview. We will take some time to do a demonstration of the Form 470 and how to apply for various services. We'll take a look at RFP and RFP documents with the 28-day waiting period. We'll discuss the selecting service providers, putting together a rubric for evaluating the bids that you may receive, and then a selection of things to consider, some things that may be deeply hidden within some of the resources that USAC makes available. But some little bits of information that might not be right at the fore of your mind, but would be good to have in mind as you go through the 470 process. So let's begin with a competitive bidding overview. Pardon?
I thought I was supposed to start.
Oh, that's right, you were. Be my guest. My apologies. I'm going to turn it over to Ann. She's going to get started, and when we get to the Form 470, I will jump back in.
We're going to start with the competitive bidding process. Just to remind you guys, this PowerPoint is mostly taken from the FY19 training resources that are on the USAC website. So you can get it there. We have pulled some slides out that are not particularly helpful for you guys. And we also have added some information that concerns you guys with consortium and state networking contracts where they do not have that information in there. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we're just going to go over the competitive bidding review. A competitive bidding process is a formal process to identify and request products and services that any applicant needs so that potential service providers can review those requests and submit bids from them. So anything you guys need in order for it to be E-rate eligible, you have to go through the competitive bidding process, essentially, is what that's saying. Complete and post a Form 470, which you will need to do before you actually submit your application. That window for 470s is open right now, so you can go ahead and start doing that if you would like. You need to wait 28 days That being said, and I think this is probably something that's in later on in the PowerPoint, but I'll go ahead and reiterate it. Your 470 will need to be posted. If your 470 is posted before your RFP actually goes live, the 28-day window actually starts when your RFP goes live. So you'll need to make sure that that lasts until the 28 days of from the RFP date being posted. Review bids and conduct bid evaluations. This also needs to make sure that when you review the bids and conduct the bid evaluations, you need to make sure that cost is the most heavily weighted option through the evaluations. Select a service provider, determine product, services, and quantities, etc., and then file FCC Form 471. The competitive bidding process must be open and fair. All bidders must be treated the same. No bidder can have advanced knowledge of the project information. There are no secrets in the process. Remember, secrets don't make friends. All bidders know what is required of them. With limited expectations, potential service providers cannot give gifts to applicants. So that goes into the gifting rule. It's $25, no more than $25 per year. And service providers must identify the value of free services. Example, product price reductions, promotional offers, and free products. Service provider role in a competitive bidding process. Requests for information from service providers should be specific and related to the FCC Form 470 and RFPs if the available information is not enough for the service provider to provide a responsive bid. Service providers can prepare, sign, and post and certify a FCC Form 470. Cannot, sorry. No, don't do that. So can is a bad thing. You don't want, so basically you don't want your service provider writing your 470 for you. That can cause quite an issue down the road.
Or an RFP.
Yes, or the RFP. So service providers cannot serve as a contact for the FCC Form 470, and their contact information cannot appear on the form. So we're going to go directly into the FCC Form 470 if there are no questions about any of the bidding process.
We don't have any questions at the moment, although it does appear that a couple of folks are typing, so we may have one shortly.
The FCC Form 470 for the upcoming funding year is generally available in Epic 1 year before the start of the funding year. For example, the FY 2019 470 is available on Epic July 1st. So as I said previously, it's already open. I know that there are some districts out there already that has started to go ahead and get their 470s out there. So services provided under tariff or month-to-month basis require Form 470. A lot of times this was basically voice services, which voice is totally phased out this year. So not even 90% districts will receive any type of reimbursement for that. And so please remember that when applying for E-rate that you will not be able to apply for voice services. Applicants may enter into multi-year contracts with service providers in subsequent years. A new FCC Form 470 is not required. The applicant will be required to post a new FCC Form 470 and conduct a new competitive bidding process once the multi-year contract has ended. So if you have for example, if you post a 470 for a 5-year, you're wanting a 5-year contract, your 470 will be good until that 5-year contract, the end date of that 5-year contract, and then you'll need to post a new 470. Okay, so RFPs and RFP documents in the 28-day waiting period. An RFP, request for proposal, is an example of formal bidding document. In some states, it's requests for information, request for quotation, statement of work, etc. USAC uses RFP and RFP document generically, to refer to any bidding document that describes the applicant's project and requested services in more detail. RFPs are required for certain services. The RFP documents must be loaded to the FCC Form 470, whether they are issued before or after the form is certified. So and I think Scott will probably talk about this later once he does the demo. If you have an RFP, or if you're doing a 470 and your RFP hasn't been completely finished, we always recommend that you put some type of document in there, so that way you can go back later on and upload your actual RFP. And And then once you upload that RFP, that will then start the 28-day window, not the date that you have certified it. Competitive bidding for WAN connectivity. This is where you were going to take over.
Okay, real quick then. Yeah. So commonly, a lot of the districts out there now are one of the major procurements that occurs is around the connectivity between your buildings and your district. In most cases, you will be looking for a fiber option of some sort. And, excuse me, there are a couple of important things to be aware of that are kind of Kentucky specific, and this kind of gets to the thing that Ann was talking about with respect to some of the slides that we've sort of readjusted so that it's more pertinent to you all, and then this is a good example of one. Let's just take the example for a moment of applying for or requesting leased lit fiber services. If you're only seeking leased lit fiber, that's the easiest option. That allows you to then just select leased lit fiber. It doesn't matter whether you're choosing, well, in your case, you would probably be choosing without internet access. You choose that leased lit option from the drop-down menus when you submit your Form 470. And you will see this on in the demonstration. Quick note that all of our schools in Kentucky receive ISP services through your Ken connection. So requesting ISP services is not required, and in fact doing so would constitute duplicative services, which is a violation of E-rate rules. That's something to be aware of, that in general in Kentucky there's no need for you all to be applying for ISP services. For applicants in an area where the fiber is not available, or you may be seeking some other option, you would use the transport-only, no ISP, non-fiber drop-down when you submit your Form 470. To request bids for both leased and non-fiber options. One of the ways that you can do this is to create two separate fiber service requests, of course, including all of your RFP docs in both of your service requests. You do one for leased lit fiber and the other for transport only, no ISP service. And that way, service providers can then come and bid on either one of the options that you've presented. When you then go to file your Form 471, you'll just identify the one service that was that you ultimately selected through your competitive bidding process. For districts that are seeking dark fiber options, the FCC requires that applicants accept bids for both dark and leased fiber and conduct a bid evaluation between the two to determine the most cost-effective option. There is a drop-down that actually allows you to select both dark and lit fiber in a single drop-down, so you will only need one service request, because the option is there to request dark and or least lit bids from your districts, or excuse me, from your service providers. If you are seeking bids for a self-provisioned network, essentially a network that the district owns and operates and cares for and oversees, it is necessary to submit two separate service requests, one for the dark and least lit fiber, and then a separate one for the self-provisioned network. This is essentially going to be the same kind of process as if you were asking for some non-fiber options as well as fiber options, as we discussed just a moment ago. But in this case, you're going to select the dark and least lit fiber in one drop-down, and then on the other service request, you'd select the self-provisioned network. Essentially, you are going to be uploading your RFP documents, and you will need an RFP because for self-provisioned fiber, it is required that you have an RFP, and in fact, I believe that's the case also for dark fiber as well. You would need RFP documents, and by the way, you'll be told by Epic when you get in there whether you need an RFP or not. So that will be that will be determined for you as based upon what you are requesting. But both of those service requests that you issue should have the RFP documents, and you need to make it clear in your documentation that you are seeking bids for all three services: the lit leased, the dark, and the self-provisioned fiber. You will be expected then to conduct a very thorough bid evaluation to determine which is the most cost-effective option, and be aware that if you choose this option, that it's going to be subject to a great deal of scrutiny when it comes to PIA review. They want to be absolutely certain before they fund anything that you all are going to own and operate that it will be the best way to spend the money. Okay, let's jump over and let's do go to the demo site if we can. So I'm going to take just a few moments and give you a quick walkthrough, and Ann, I think, is going to take over on the questions. By the way, while we're doing this now, Ann, do we have any questions that we can address? I saw that we had a couple, and...
Okay, so Mark Thompson asked, we own a fiber for 60 to 64 sites and would like to file Cat 1 for Connect equipment for WAN uplink and Layer 3 device. Do we need a mini bid or an RFP?
The Layer 3 device, I believe you can be purchasing from the CATS contracts. If you are purchasing that from the CATS contract, that you would need only to do a mini bid, so you would request quotes from each of the service providers that are on the CATS contracts, and then do a mini bid between them. If there are any of those other items in what you're requesting that are not on the state contract, you will need to do a 470 for those items. Others?
That looks like it for right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so, yeah, perfect. Megan, you are on top of it. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to do a real quick demonstration of filing a Form 470 for fiber service. So I'm going to click on the link at the top right of the Epic portal and start a new Form 470. We begin with giving it an application nickname, and we'll call this 2019 Fiber, and we will save and continue. By the way, you can see that all of these, or each of these windows or pages, have a save and share option, as well as a save and continue. Obviously, the continue will take you to the next page. The save and share will then let you save where you are and then send the application to someone else to continue the application or the 470 and then certify it. So, okay, so this second page, it's just going to ask you about your recipients of service. This should be information that will automatically load in, and really it's just a review for this page for any activity on your part. So we'll save and continue. Move on to the next. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to pause for a minute because
Please
I think you had said something. So Mark was asking about Category 1 equipment that is actually from our networking contracts, but it's Category 1.
It's Category 1.
So
yes.
I'm typing it right now, but I'm going to clarify
You're right.
this.
Yes.
With it bidding Category 1, Mark, you will need to make sure to do a 470, but consider the networking contracts as a bid for that 470. Because you're doing a 470 and because, correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, because you're doing a 470, you don't necessarily have to choose the networking. Is that right?
Correct. Well, no, the state law still requires
Okay.
yeah.
So that's why I said correct me. So you'll need to do a 470. You'll have to file your own 470 because it's Category 1, because our 470 that's filed with the state is not does not cover Category 1 because that was not even an option when we first did this 470 for this. So you'll do your own 470 and then kind of do a mini bid within that 470. It'll have to be open for 28 days. You'll have to email all your vendors and make sure they're aware that you've posted it. And you should be able to go from there. I'm also typing this out too as well, so you'll have it in writing.
Good point. Thank you. I appreciate that. I obviously missed that somewhere in the very important note. And I think we also have some information about that later on in the PowerPoint as well. So, are you the main contact person? If you are, say yes. If no, you'll be asked to enter. You say yes, it just automatically puts your information in there as the contact information. Save and continue, move on to the next page. Category of service. Recall that a Form 470 can be filed for both Category 1 and Category 2. In other words, you can use a single Form 470 to request any eligible service. It is not necessary to file separate ones. You can if you'd like. That's fine. That's totally up to you. Seems to me that probably makes more sense to do one if you know all of the things that you want right away. We're just using this right now as an example of filing for fiber, so I'm just going to click Category 1 at this time. Click Save and Continue. Is there an RFP for the services for any of the services you are requesting? We'll go ahead and say yes. It's going to ask you to upload. And I'm not sure if we have a empty doc we can use here. Yeah, let's just put that in there. There we go. And it's a quick upload. You can see you can drag and drop as well. Be aware that the RFP thing, if you upload an RFP and then you later have changes to it, if you have changed the scope of your project, if it's gotten bigger, if it's gotten significantly smaller, you've added new types of services, you will need to re-upload the RFP, and then be aware that if you do that, you are essentially restarting the 28-day waiting clock. So be aware that that's important. And if you have services that, if you have additional information that you want to share with your service providers, but you don't have necessarily an RFP. It doesn't have to be a big formal document. It can be anything that really helps describe the project. You want to make sure that you've included that, and make sure that. And one other thing that you can be aware of, if you get let's say you get a set of questions that come in from a bidder, what you need to be sure that you are doing is that you provide each of the bidders or potential bidders that you're aware of anyway, the information that you are providing to one vendor needs to be provided to all. So this is also a good place for you to keep a list of frequently asked questions or Q&As that you've responded to, so that anyone who wants to bid on your project would be able to do so, and would be able to do so with all of the information that they need. So we'll save and continue. Does what you've just applied apply to all new Category 1 services? We'll say yes in this case. If not, you'll be able to associate one of the documents later on to each of the different requests that you have. We'll save and continue. Here we're going to have a narrative. We're seeking fiber to connect all buildings in the district. That's a brief narrative. I would suggest that when you go and put the narrative in yourself, you identify the number of buildings, the approximate distances or locations, so that your potential bidders will have a better understanding of the extent and scope of the project, so that they can provide you with a reasonable and sensible response to your bid request. For here, we'll save and continue. You must enter at least one service request. Oh, of course, I completely skipped over that. Okay, so we'll start. I thought that was on the next page. We're going to add a new service request, and this is basically the meat of each 470 is your service requests. We're going to select, in this case, we'll just use least lit fiber. You can see that it's with or without internet access. Notice also you have the option here of the transport only, no ISP. You also have the option here that we discussed a few moments ago for least dark and least lit fiber. So it's no longer necessary to do a separate one for dark fiber and one for lit fiber. You do one, and then you're essentially requesting bids for both when you do this one. And we will go ahead and select the least lit fiber for now. The quantity will be essentially the number of circuits that you're going to request. So let's just use 5 as an example. It all automatically enters in the units for you because you're requesting fiber. It knows that you're asking for circuits. And here's a really important point, and we'll get back to this in the miscellaneous, I think, a little bit toward the end here, but it is terribly important that you select a range of speeds for the connections that you're requesting funding for. And this is important because what it ultimately boils down to is that if you request a specific speed and you only request one speed, that what USAC will do is if you request or if you end up going with or needing a higher speed, you're stuck with the highest speed that's listed on your contract or in the bids that you received from your winning vendor. What that ends up doing is that you're essentially locking yourself into that speed or forcing yourself to go out and rebid the contract perhaps early because you didn't get a range of speeds. Let's say that you only want 1 gig out to an elementary school, but you need 10 gigs to a high school. You're going to need to then obviously ask for that full range. I used a low number on the bottom end, 400 megs. I'm going to use 50 gig on the top. Obviously here, that's a very wide range of options, but nevertheless, what that should prompt your service providers to do is to provide you with essentially a chart of showing all the different speeds in between them, in between your maximum and minimum that you've selected, and they should be providing pricing for you on each of those. If they don't, you can go to them and ask for that additional information. Number of entities served. We said we were asking for 5 circuits. Let's just assume we have 5 separate buildings within the district. In some cases, you may have bonded a couple of lines together, so it just depends on the number of buildings essentially they're being served as opposed to necessarily the number of circuits. Sometimes the number of circuits may be higher or lower than the number of entities served based upon any number of different variables that may be in play. Are you also seeking installation activation and initial configuration for this service? My recommendation is always say yes here. Why? Because you can always decide later that you don't want it. But if you don't ask for it up front, you're not going to get it. Or at least you're not going to get funding for it. So that's a really important piece to note. If you know that you're not going to want installation activation because everything's already set up, fine, not a problem. So, you'll note that there is additional information provided to you here with respect to all of the different selections, the options on your drop-down menus that will provide you with some additional guidance as you go through this process. And we've got everything put in, and we're going to add. And we have now added a service request. If we wanted to add a new service request, we just click Add a New Service Request. And then this allows you to select which one you're looking for. In this case, we'll say transport only. Why? Because, well, we've already asked for the fiber option, but hey, maybe there's a copper option or there's a microwave option that we'd also like to explore. Again, we're going to have some same kind of thing with 5 circuits. You'll indicate your low and your high top end speeds, your number of entities served. Yes, you'd probably want to make sure that that's included as well, and then click Add. And then you can see that in certain circumstances, they'll provide you with some additional support information so that you're aware of what you're asking for and providing you with additional information. So you can see here it says if you would like to receive and consider proposals for self-provision network, leased dark fiber or leased lit fiber, you should not select transport only. No ISP services. If you are seeking bids for a self-provision network, you must select self-provision network, applicant-owned and operated network, and the services provided over the third-party networks. If you are seeking bids for leased lit dark fiber, you must select leased dark and leased lit fiber. So it really depends upon what it is that you're looking for and to what extent you already know what you're looking for versus exploring all of your options at once. We are going to say yes and move on, and you can see then that it's added the service request there as well. So you have one for each, and that way you will have options to explore both or any of the bids that you would receive for this service request. Are you looking for an installment payment plan? In this case, we're going to say no, but there is that option. You would be indicating essentially to your service providers that that's something that you are interested in. They may or may not then offer you that installment payment plan as an option. That installment payment plan, for what it's worth, is often associated with projects that include special construction. And by the way, for those of you who might be getting into the world of special construction, time, I think, at this point prevents us from getting into too many details as far as that's concerned. But if you are looking at projects that might require some special construction, feel free to contact Ann and or myself, and we will help you with some of the specifics on that, because it can get a little hairy and a little complicated. And we also want to make sure that you get funded instead of denied, and it's easy to have that happen. There are a few pitfalls you probably want to be aware of. Is there a person who can provide additional technical details or answer specific questions from service providers about the services you are seeking? If you have someone who knows the technical stuff perhaps better than you do, then obviously you want to say yes. If they are already an Epic user, you can search the Epic system to add them. If they are not an Epic user, you can enter their contact information manually. If there is not a contact person other than yourself, then you would obviously just click no, and then move on to save and continue. Are there state or local procurement requirements? In this case, especially with respect to the Category 1 networking components, the Category 1 networking equipment. It's going to be important for bidders to know that you are required to file in that you are required to purchase from the CATS contracts. That is going to be important information for bidders that are not on the state contract. They need to know that they are essentially probably not using their time the best they could, because you are essentially required to pick from those contracts. So we will send out some information, or we have a blurb that we've sent out. We need to make a note to ourselves.
Actually, Jared has posted it to. Jared with Grayson County has already posted it to the Skype link chat for the blurb.
That is awesome.
No, not that blurb.
Not
Sorry.
that one? No, okay.
Sorry, blurb mistaken. This blurb that he sent out is for the Category 1 equipment from the networking contracts that we sent out last year.
Yeah, well, that's what we've used here. Districts are required by state regulation.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's exactly the one.
Except for you won't need to put the contract agreement number on there.
Yeah, no, but the statement itself is an important thing to include, so that you've got yourself covered in terms of making sure that that your bidders are aware that there are restrictions. And I've just put a little blurb in there. It's something similar to that. And you can see that we're now very close to the end of the process. This really isn't all that complicated, thankfully. So we click on review, and basically the system now starts to generate a PDF. It used to be that you'd have to continue to hit refresh. They seem to have fixed that so that the page will refresh automatically when the PDF becomes available. It used to be that you could, depending upon the size of your application or your 470, that you might have it sit there and spin for enough time to go get a cup of coffee. It does seem to be taking its time today as well. Let's see if the old process of refreshing the page. Oh, that's interesting. That did not work at all.
Shouldn't be under task. It's going to be a create one.
Discard. I went to the wrong one. This is it. There we go. And there's now, good, there we're back and we've got our PDF. This is a draft, as Ann and I have said before, and we will continue to say, feel free to download that, send it to myself, Ann, or your KETS engineer. Any of us would be more than happy to take a look at it and make sure that, at least on the surface, everything appears to be as it should be. That having been said, let me throw in the typical disclaimer to say that you know much better than we do what it is you're asking for, but we're certainly happy to look at some of the more cursory or rudimentary aspects of your application to make sure that there are no glaring errors on it from what we know and what we can see. So you'll check the box to indicate that you have, in fact, made proper and correct entries onto your 470 on that PDF. You've looked at it, you've reviewed it, you're ready to go, and you continue to certification. And as if you couldn't tell that the words continue to certification means that you're going to move into certifying the FCC Form 470, they give you a little extra pop-up. It's like, are you sure you want to delete this? Yes. Are you really, really sure you want to delete this? Yes. Well, are you really, really sure? I know that sometimes that's helpful. All right, so applicant certifications. I certify that the applicant includes schools under the statutory definitions, blah, blah, blah. Basically, these are all going to be, I don't believe there are any of the gotchas that you can find on the Form 471. But these certifications basically include a series of attestations that, yes, you know that you have to follow state procurement rules, that you have to select the most cost-effective service, you acknowledge that you could be held liable legally or financially for misgiving or misusing E-rate funds. You acknowledge the 10-year retention of documentation. And a few others here. I think the last one is, yeah, you have the district has the wherewithal to cover all the costs, and you're aware that you are attesting that you're authorized to cover those or request those services, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those are going to be checked off. Each of those is going to have a check box or check next to it, and then we're certifying, and that should wrap up the process. And now, when we go to the landing page, if we search for Form 470, 470 for 2019, our application shows up. If you want to get back into it, you can click on it. It'll take you back to be able to review what you've entered. You can't make any changes to it here, although in the related actions, notice that you can change the nickname, you can add an RFP document, you can change the contact person, you also have the ability to edit the technical contact as well. So you do have a little bit of flexibility even after you've submitted your 470. So that kind of really briefly and quickly wraps up the demonstration. And I think I was going to turn it back to you. No.
You were finishing
No,
out, and I was
back-
going to start with discontinued.
Ah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Megan, if you could switch back to the PowerPoint, that would be very helpful.
I think
Thank
you
you.
have to do.
Oh, I have to do that, of course. Duh.
You're on.
I'm on the, yes.
You're on your
Yeah,
computer.
sometimes I'm just not too bright. Okay. And the slideshow button. Oh, yeah, it's been a while since I've used PowerPoint. Where's the start slide? Start show?
Very top.
That one? Ah, of course. Oh, we'll have to blow through these really quickly. Yep, we talked about those. All right, so what comes next? After you've certified your form, the form is posted in Epic and on the SLD website for your service providers to review, and they'll submit bids. The service provider does not submit bids to USAC, but obviously they're going to be submitting it to you. And excuse me, and if you list specific requirements for preparing or submitting bids in the RFP or narrative on the FCC form, the service provider must follow those instructions. You do have the ability, or you have the option, if they don't follow those instructions, to essentially disqualify their bid for being non-responsive. Excuse me. After the FCC Form 470 is certified, the applicant will receive a receipt. No, it's not the receipt acknowledgement. It's the, oh goodness, what's the RNL? It's a receipt notification letter. They're indicating you'll get an email and a notification in your news feed in Epic that indicates that you have, in fact, filed your Form 470. It's essentially just acknowledging that they have received the form itself. It has been posted as was necessary. It will list the date, and then it'll also list the date the minimum 28-day period is over, and which essentially gives you that allowable contract date. Corrections and additions that can be made to the form after certification, we just looked at those. Those can be done as well. I just went the wrong direction, didn't I? Yep, I did. And then we get to the process of selecting service providers. After the competitive bidding process is closed and your 28-day waiting period is over, you must go through the process of evaluating the bids and choosing the most cost-effective solution. The price on any E-rate eligible products and services must be weighted more heavily than any other single factor in the bid evaluation. We'll take a look at a chart here in a moment. It demonstrates that quite nicely. The applicant, you, can choose to consider one or many factors in the evaluation of your bid. This is just a quick sample. You can see then that in this example, price, obviously, it receives or has the most potential points in the review. And then you have the question of prior experience with the vendor, whether the service provider is bonded, or are they local or in-state. Those are just a couple of examples. You can choose really anything that makes sense to you. May have to do with product reviews, information that you gather from third parties such as, and we'll talk about this in a minute, Gartner Group and things of those kinds of and organizations that provide IT evaluation and information. So in this case, you can see that vendor 3 did not actually submit the least expensive option. They are right in the middle there. You know, vendor 1, obviously their bid was quite expensive. Vendor 2, in being the least expensive, receives all of the points available for their proposal. But in this case, there was no prior experience with that vendor. They were bonded, but apparently with some questions still about that. But when you do all the math on it, you realize that, and you see that vendor 3 actually comes up with the best score. That is your winning bid, even though they are not the least expensive option. So that's you do have some flexibility in how you construct these bid evaluation, easy for me to say, bid evaluation matrices. When you build these, you can design them in such a way as to make sure that you're getting essentially the products and or services that you really are seeking. So what happens if you get no bids? You can go out and actually solicit bids. You can go to known service providers in your area, in your region, or in the state, and you can ask them for bids. You can also use a bill as a bid for a service that you're already currently receiving. You would want to ask the service provider to agree in writing that the service could continue for the upcoming year, and that the cost of that service would be the same, or that they would at least in the letter indicate what the cost of that service would be. If you receive one bid, you can choose that bid if you believe it to be cost effective. If it's ridiculously expensive, you may be questioned on that, and in fact, it is possible that even though you receive one bid, that your application, your 471, later on down the road, would be rejected because, for whatever reason, and obviously the reason in this case would be the very, very high price, that your request for support on your Form 471 could in fact be denied under those circumstances. So just be aware that just because there's one bid doesn't mean you can or have to take that one. In either case, as it points out, the applicant should write an email or memo to note the file, to write an email or memo to the file noting no bids or one bid was received. Essentially, send an email to yourself just documenting the fact that on such and such a date, you've closed the bidding and only one or no bids were received, so that you can then print it or put it in your electronic version of your E-rate binder. Now, let's get into this whole question of the Category 1 networking equipment. And Ann already kind of touched on this. We had the question about it. If you are using the CAT's networking contracts to acquire or procure networking equipment under Category 1, let's say, for example, you're acquiring a new core router, you must file a Form 470 yourself. That is because, as Ann pointed out, when we went to file a Form 470 for those contracts, networking equipment could not be purchased under Category 1. It was Category 2 only. And actually, at that time, it was Priority 2. That rule has been changed since, but we are unable to, unless we go back out to bid, which we won't be doing yet for a little while, we are stuck with a Form 470 that only lists these items as Category 2 eligible. So, unfortunately, that does mean then that you are required to provide or to file your own Form 470. And the product must be necessary. In order to make that product eligible, it must be a critical component. That is to say that the network cannot function without the equipment, that you would not be able to get connectivity down to a classroom if you did not have that piece of equipment in place. And obviously, a core router is a really good example of that. The use of the CAT's networking contracts to procure eligible services under Category 2 does not require a Form 470 to be filed. In these instances, you will cite the Commonwealth's Form 470 number that's listed on the contract matrix, coming soon, when you go to file your Form 471. Somewhere along the way, the font on this got changed, because probably the font isn't on this local machine. So it's a little bit bigger than what was expected. But that's essentially what that's going to say later on. There's when filing the Form 471. So, a few things to consider. We've already discussed a couple of these, but some of these are buried, if not almost unfindable in USAC documentation, and yet they are important to make certain that you are not violating some sort of rule of theirs. You are not allowed to just simply upload a link in lieu of actually putting in the RFP. They want you to always upload the document itself. The document also, if you have your RFP and you are mentioning specific vendors in the document itself, if you are mentioning, for example, I'll pick somebody we don't even have on contract, Cisco. Obviously, you're not going to be choosing them, but if you said, we want a Cisco 4783 router, you need to make certain that you are using the terms or equivalent, because otherwise you've already demonstrated that you're only willing to accept that one version or that one product, and you have to be, in order to make sure that this is truly competitive bidding, it has to be open to all eligible vendors. Gartner type information can be used for disqualification, but make sure that if you are using that information as part of your bid evaluations, make sure that it doesn't eliminate all but the one vendor that you're probably wanting to have. Just be careful that you can't use a piece of disqualification criteria that disqualifies all but one. Essentially, that's going to be considered also a competitive bidding violation. As I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you get a pricing schedule that prices out multiple speed levels, because if you want to increase speeds later on down the road, if you don't have a pricing schedule, then you are stuck with whatever the highest speed is that was listed on your existing contract. Mini bids must consider all E-rate eligible vendors on a state contract. So you'll have to make sure that you at least request a quote from each of the KETS vendors. If you do not receive a response from one of them, because perhaps they just know that you're not a shop that uses their products, I know that on a number of occasions that has happened in the past, that you just make note of that to yourself, that yes, on such and such a date, I sent the request, we gave them 2 weeks, never heard anything back from them, therefore we can consider them. There is no 28-day waiting period required for mini bids. That having been said, I would recommend 10 business days after you make the request for the quote before you begin to conduct your mini bid. Any disqualification criteria should be in your Form 470 and RFP. So in other words, as we mentioned, let's say that there's a certain, I wish I had a good example for this, there's a certain, you've got one school, let's say that is an outlier in your district that has proven to be difficult to get services to. And let's say that you want to simply disqualify any vendor that is not capable of delivering services to that location. If that's going to be a disqualification criteria item, you want to make sure that that is clearly spelled out in the RFP and the 470. Put it in the narrative. Let them know up front. Don't risk being denied later on down the road because you weren't abundantly explicit. Another thing that also needs to be explicit is in the contract itself. The resulting contract needs to have an explicitly defined end date. You cannot have a contract that can be renewed in perpetuity, even if they are 1-year renewals. We'll go through an annual review process, but the contract allows us to renew over and over and over and over again as long as we want. That is not an allowable contract. That is not an eligible contract for E-rate. You have to have a specifically defined end date for the contract. So yes, you can make provision for renewals. So you want to have like a 1-year contract with 2 1-year renewals, or you want to have a 4-year contract with 3 annual or possible 3, potentially up to 3 extensions. You can do that. because in both of those cases, you have a clear date after which the contract will no longer be valid. That's the important element in making sure that you're meeting that criteria. You are allowed to have a product demo, and I mean product demo, that is to say that a vendor can come in and provide you with a device that you can kick around, so to speak, put it on your network, beat on it a little bit, make sure that it's up to snuff, that it meets your needs. You can have one on loan to you for 1 to 2 weeks and perhaps even a little bit longer. Obviously, you get into stretching weeks into months, and now that's going to be looked at, I think, on USAC's part as more of a gift and not so much a loaner so that you can test it. So if you are going to have a product demo or a demo product and put it on your network and work with it, kick the tires, make sure that you document that you've received it, when you received it, and when you returned it. And I would suggest you might even want to make sure that you get some sort of acknowledgement back from the vendor that shows that you can provide documentation to show that the funds, or excuse me, that the device went back to the vendor as it should. And then it is possible to make an existing contract that was not created with a 470, it's possible to make that contract E-rate eligible. The way to do it is to post a Form 470, and then when you get the other bids, you take your existing bid and you evaluate it as if it had been submitted to you as a bid. So that should then, if that is in fact the winning contract, or excuse me, the winning bid, then you can, essentially you have made that contract eligible.
Okay, do we have any questions?
Did you see any just a moment ago?
I think I've answered everything. Cliff asked us to specify specific equipment on Category 1 routing switches that are eligible.
That's going to be any piece of equipment that if you remove it from the network setup, the entire network no longer functions. So the example I give is what's a good example between Category 1 and Category 2 on the networking equipment. Core router is a really good example of you take that out of the equation and your network goes down. But let's say, for example, a switch in an intermediate data frame, in a closet somewhere, one of your sub closets, or even in your main building closet. Those serve essentially just the buildings in the classroom, and if you take that out, you may lose part of the functionality within your network, but the entire network is not affected. That's a Category 2 piece of equipment versus Category 1, and it really does come down to what delineates Category 1 from Category 2 is where it sits within the network and what functionality stays and goes if you remove it from that. I don't see any additional questions at this time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Ann, and she's going to do a quick run through with you on the discount data sheets, an example of the ones that we're about to send out.
So this is going to be a really quick run through because we're getting really close on time.
Sorry.
Most of you all, and for anybody that's new, we had a newbies E-rate, an E-rate newbie webcast a couple weeks ago. Where we kind of went over this in more detail. If you're not new, you've seen this sheet before, it hasn't changed. We just wanted to touch base on how it's going to come to you and how you need to return it. Essentially what you're looking at is exactly like one that is being sent back to us. When it comes to you, it won't have any of the CEP stuff if your district is a CEP district. So you'll need to change that. Please remember to copy when you enter your direct cert percentage for your school districts. Please remember that column L will be automatically calculated for you, and you will need to take column L and paste it into column E. That is the biggest thing that we can tell you guys to remember to do. Also, please remember to make sure that your non-instructional facilities are listed in your Epic portal. We still have districts out there that still have not taken care of this since 2016, even though we've been harping on it since 2016. This needs to match with the things that you send us because our state valid file will not be correct. And you will get more verification letters that Scott and I will have to make sure to fill out for you guys and submit back to you guys. I think that's basically it. We will make sure that the column E and F will be filled out and your USAC school number, unless there is a new building and we do not have that USAC school number. So if the numbers that you had from last year will be already pasted in there, we will just paste in the school names and the NSLP data that we have that's being pulled from Infinite Campus. If you scroll down to the bottom, the data, we will put the date that it's pulled. It could be, it's whatever day in October that you had the highest attendance rate that we've pulled. So if you need any clarification with anything, please don't hesitate to call Scott and I or email us. We are available to you guys. We are a resource to you all to help you for anything. We don't mind for you all to call us and ask us questions. We actually encourage it.
And get the help on the front and have to deal with appeals and so on and so forth.
So we plan on trying to get the discount data out to you hopefully by next week. That's our goal that we've set for ourselves. We know how sometimes that doesn't always work out the way we plan it to, but that's the hope. And we obviously, USAC has not released a window date yet, so we are not sure when the admin window will close, but we will need your discount data to match your admin. We'll need to match what's in your Epic portal. So you'll need to make sure to get everything in your Epic portal before the admin window closes, which it closes the day before, at 11:59 p.m. on the night before the window opens at 12:01. And we will make sure to get that information out to you as soon as we have it. The KEs, your KE will distribute that to you. We will make sure to get that information out to them as soon as we have it. However, they sometimes see it before we do, just because if something pops up in their email before we're able to see it. So if you guys have any questions, we're here to answer them. If you all need anything, let us know. I don't think there's any more questions.
We did have one question, and it's probably worth noting just because it's, not everybody's online on Skype as well. The question came in, USTAC still doesn't count preschool, yes? And the answer to that is very quickly, at least for Kentucky, correct. Pre-K students are not eligible within the state of Kentucky. Therefore, any discount data numbers, whether it's NSLP or enrollment figures, those numbers should not include pre-K. So when you review our numbers that we've sent you that's been pulled from Infinite Campus, be aware that we should have, and we've worked hard with our data team to make sure that as much as possible we are extracting those ineligible students from those numbers. But it's one of those things that you'll want to make sure that you double check just to be aware of.
And that being said, it's not actually USAC. That's a Kentucky thing. Not a USAC thing, because USAC, anyway, that's going to muddy the waters, but yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything else. Cliff has some sort of specific questions, so I'll be more than happy to continue with him. But I think other than that, we're just about at the end.
471s, 471 training. We will be doing what we like to call our traveling roadshow, as some of you all know. We will schedule those dates with your KEs. Since we do not know the open of the window, we have not talked about that yet with the KEs. As soon as we know the window date, we will get you all a date and have everything set up for you all.
And just as an addition to that, I think the plan will be to do as we've done in the recent past and make sure that we coordinate with the regional meetings that your KEs already have with you, so that there won't be an additional or an extra day out from work for you from your duties as your daily duties. I think no more questions, so I think we're good to go. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again sometime in January or February. Thank you.
Have a great Christmas.